All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to tonight's edition of Elections Weekly. With us tonight, we have myself and Kraz. Dylan should be joining us here in a second. Joe could not make it tonight due to a personal matter he has to attend to. But he should be back here next week if all things are going well. So, yeah, we're going to go right into it. And this week, we've got a pretty short episode for you. We're just going to go into the Wyoming primaries here. I'm going to talk about some nonsense that has happened in the state of North Carolina, my home state. And then we're also going to go over some of the primaries coming up next week. But let's go ahead and go right into it. As you already know, if you're one of the 24,000 people who watched our live stream, apparently, Liz Cheney lost her primary on Tuesday. She lost it by a wide margin. Almost all the votes are in. DDHQ says 99% of the votes are in. And with this total right now, she has lost the Republican primary with 66% of the vote. Going to Harriet Hageman, the Trump-endorsed nominee here, and only 29% of the vote going to Liz Cheney. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so you can see exactly what this map looks like, because it's very interesting what this map looks like. You may notice a pattern here going from election to election. So this right here is the presidential election in Wyoming. You'll notice that Donald Trump won nearly almost 70% of the vote here, which is just wow. But he lost two counties. He lost Teton County, which is a affluent ski country county, and he lost Albany, which is home to a college. Liz Cheney's map looks exactly the same. She won Teton County by a very wide margin. It had some pretty high turnout, probably due to Democrats switching to the Republican primary. And she lost Albany County by a pretty similar margin to what Trump lost by. So not a great night for her. You'll notice, again, 113,000 votes just for Hageman. The Democratic primary had 7,000 total, compared to 170,000 for all the Republicans. But yeah, some of these margins were just crushing. In Cheyenne, Cheney only got 38%. That's one of the bigger cities. Natrona, 30%, and then Park County, only 24%. And some of these other ones, she just got pathetically small totals. Lincoln County, only 19% of the vote, 12% of the vote. So not a great night for Liz Cheney. We, of course, expected this to go fairly poorly for Liz Cheney. Obviously, she had been facing some popularity issues for her, not, I wouldn't say so much for the Trump impeachment vote, but a lot of what came afterward, which is joining the January 6th Commission, focusing almost entirely on Trump, and alienating leadership is the big one. Leadership sided with her. That first attempt to get rid of her from leadership following that vote, they sided with her. And the perception among them is that she stabbed them in the back later. So that's why you saw some of the, like Kevin McCarthy and a bunch of other pretty normie Republicans going pretty heavily at Liz Cheney. So I'll go ahead and throw it to, go ahead, Dylan.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, yes, it wasn't solely the impeachment vote, but
it was mostly.
8 out of 10 of the impeachment Republicans have lost. So
yeah, I'm just saying specifically. Yeah, I'm just saying specifically this also, there's a huge part in why this was so bad, is Republicans actively fought to get rid of her. Whereas for most of these other primaries, they stayed neutral or endorsed the incumbent. Like Peter Meyer. Obviously, I think the worst one was Tom Rice in South Carolina, only getting about this percent of the vote. But that was also an inexplicable decision on his part. And it wasn't like Republicans were actively campaigning against him. So I know Dylan is not a huge fan of Liz Cheney. You were on that stream. I think your perception remains unchanged, that you find this incredibly amusing overall.
I like when bad guys lose. Unfortunately, a bad guy also won here. So
wasn't Hageman like anti-Trump back in like 2016?
Yeah, she's a never Trumper. She was a never Trumper who was a Cruz delegate, tried to get Trump removed at the convention. Big Liz Cheney supporter until recently.
Well,
honestly, the irony is delicious. The
irony. Someone posted the Liz Cheney political compass of all the positions that she's alienated over the years. I just found it hilarious. This is the end of the Cheney dynasty. Yeah,
that compass was funny because it's pretty accurate about she obviously the Cheney name is not popular with most Democrats because of the history there with her father.
More popular now.
Well, more popular now, maybe marginally, but there's that, and then there's the whole thing with her sister, which I think makes a lot of people who maybe otherwise would be kind of sympathetic to her, look at her pretty negatively. And then also you have to consider, like, she's not popular with the Trump base. Establishment Republicans feel like she stabbed him in the back. Like, she's managed to take, essentially like a gift from God in being part of a political dynasty and turn it into like just an MSNBC gig, I guess, but like otherwise not very much.
Well,
I mean, you underestimate how much of an MSNBC. I mean, she could be a View co-host in about 5 years or so.
Yeah,
Give
yeah,
it
could be
time.
big.
yeah, I mean, all she needs now is a failed presidential run, and
Yeah.
she'll be on The View.
Switch to the Forward Party. Run.
Oh my God, could you imagine her in the Forward Party?
Yes, I can. I think it's actually very possible. Her
You
and
think?
Adam Kinzinger. Kinzinger was pretty vocal in supporting Yang in that whole Acosta interview thing, and said maybe we do need a third party. So
This
come
would just
on.
be like Reform UK, where you get like 2 or 3 congressmen to switch to it, and then they all get removed. Either just Kinzinger got gerrymandered out because Cheney lost, and then they just dissolve as a party.
Yeah, they run for
Oh my
president,
God.
get 3% of the vote.
I still think.
Oh,
it's,
3%? No, 3%. 3% is too much. 3% is too generous to the Forward Party. I think 0.3% is a little bit more realistic.
Well, they're gonna have an absurd amount of money behind them. So
Who wants to fund that? Like, their motto is literally like their motto is not left, not right, forward.
Kraz
Like,
the
what does that even
Lincoln
mean?
Kraz
What
the
does
Lincoln
that-
Kraz the Lincoln Party exists. The Lincoln Project exists.
Ugh.
I mean,
Not left,
just
not
like,
right, forward is one of those slogans that sounds great when you're 13 years old. And then
Yes.
you realize this isn't actually a slogan that makes any sense whatsoever.
Well, and the real problem for Yang is he tried to turn that slogan into a defensible policy position for how he'd deal with abortion.
Yeah, honestly, I want to see the backward party. I want to see like the integralist backward party, not left, not right, backward.
Eric, that's called the Sierra Club.
Oh. Oh.
Yep. Yeah, but obviously, we played taps in the chat played taps in our session for Liz Cheney. Her
Which
political
I
career is over.
protest.
Yep, her political career is over. Her career as an MSNBC contributor, or maybe a
She's
host of a new
just kidding.
CNN show. Bulwark contributor. I hear there's big money writing for the Bulwark.
Man, I'm kind of jealous of all their grifts. I mean, they have such good grifts. I mean, you get to take money from people who are nominally Democrats but desperately want to feel like they can respect a Republican again.
Oh yeah, nobody. The media loves nothing more than a Republican that does not like other Republicans. This has been consistent for the last 40 years. You go back to John Anderson. Like, they just love these guys.
Don't forget Democrats who don't like other Democrats.
Yeah, of course, that's the Fox News gig. That's the Zell Millers of the world, and
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard.
they usually get their own Fox News show or become a co-host or write a book or something. Usually, it's one of those 3. But yeah, we're going to go ahead. I think that we've kind of exhausted Wyoming. I want to go to probably what's going to take up most of our show is the North Carolina
Alaska.
nonsense. Oh yeah, Alaska. Yeah. So it's going to be Sarah Palin, I think, is the winner here, but we don't really know because Alaska's system is stupid.
So I think so, but I'm actually like I'm not like supremely confident in that, only because if this last 20-ish% of the vote is what we think it is, which is it's going to be mail ballots from predominantly like Democratic leaning areas, so it's going to be pretty Democratic. That means Peltola is going to have like 40 and Palin's going to have like 30.7 or something. So yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I've heard 42% is probably what she need to be closer to, 42, 43%.
So I think 42 is what she probably needs to be closer to. But if you run let me run the math on this right here.
Yeah.
If it's 40 to 31, let's say, to 29, which would be the last bit for Begich. So let's say that's the math. And 20% of Begich's voters leave the ballot blank, which is, I think, a fairly okay estimate for a partisan race like this in ranked choice voting. And 20% of his voters go to Peltola. That gives her about 46% of the vote. And then the remainder goes to Palin. That would give her about 48. So Palin would win 48-46, which then, because of the ranked choice voting stuff, would turn into a 51-49 win. Wait,
yeah, I think it's a pretty tough window because you have to assume a lot of Begich voters are not going to vote for Palin. You have to assume there's a lot of assumptions you have to make. This is a dumb system. I want to reiterate how dumb this is. Alaska votes almost entirely by mail. It takes weeks for results to get in. You could have accomplished this exact same thing with less steps with approval voting. Approval voting is like ranked choice voting, except it's not dumb. Just vote for as many candidates as you like. Literally, it's you tabulate it immediately. There's no need to retabulate anything. We do this for city council races, county commission races all the time. Just do approval voting. We won't have to wait 5 weeks to get the results here.
With approval voting, Begich wins, and it's not close. I don't think because all the Palin voters are, or not all, but a lot of the Palin voters are okay with him. His voters are okay with him, and even a lot of the Democrats are okay with him. So
Begich wins comfortably in approval vote.
Yeah, the problem is ranked choice is much more complicated, and complicated is there's nothing that makes an election reform advocate more excited than a very complicated voting system that has as many steps as possible to mathematically result in the winner getting over 50% of the vote, even if 50% of voters did not vote for them.
My election reform is very consistent. I believe we should have way more elections, and they should be done via approval voting.
I don't know why people don't talk about approval voting. We literally do this for city council races. I'm used to voting for multiple candidates in my county commission. You vote for 4 of them, like 3 or 4 of them.
Elect judges, elect cabinet positions federally, and do it via approval voting.
Yeah, but regardless, we won't know this. We won't even know any additional results until next week. I'm pretty sure is what I've heard, that we won't get any additional results until then. So this is all the coverage we can give for Alaska, other than like this rough estimate of like how the votes could go out.
I did have a question, actually, Eric.
Go right ahead.
Did the governing coalition survive again?
In the House, it's more iffy. The Senate is kind of weird because right now, Kathy Giessel, who is a very coalition-friendly person who's endorsed Bill Walker, is ahead in her primary over another. Is that basically the candidates are all going to go to the general? So it's going to be 2 Republicans and a Democrat. Kathy Giessel lost her primary last time for being too liberal. Kelly Merrick is leading hers, but again, I would be hesitant to say any of these people are favorites because we don't know how the votes change from the primary to the general. The primary, you have a bunch of candidates on the list, and the general, the party can pick the nominee they're going to lobby for. It's not just one-on-one like in California or in Washington where you can trace the results pretty consistently. This is 4 of them. So I would actually be pretty hesitant to just say from going off of anything. My initial assessment would be it's more likely there's a coalition in the Senate than in the House. But that's just, I think the coalition's at like 19 members right now ahead in the House, 18 or 19. So I really don't know. Part of the problem for a coalition is that it's going to be binding. So we really don't know, but the coalition has 2 friendly people for them ahead in the Senate, which that would put it at 10-10, at which point there probably would need to be a coalition of some type.
Mm-hmm.
The House seems a little bit less likely, but this is pretty typical. The House the coalition loses seats and then they somehow get more because they don't get the hint of what Republican primary voters like, except there's no Republican primary anymore. But yeah, I may write about this. But again, I don't want to talk too much about the top 4 because we really don't know how this is going to go. There's not the system anywhere else in the country, so I don't feel comfortable saying we can predict where the ballots are going to go to, or how things are going to go out from a primary to a general, like in Washington, where it's very reliable. That if they get this much, the Democrats are going to gain about 4 points. Like that's pretty consistent across the board. Since Kraz and I are on tonight, we're going to talk about this latest North Carolina nonsense. One of the strange, so basically right now, North Carolina has a 4-3 Democratic controlled Supreme Court. 2 of these seats are open in November. Democrats are pretty heavily favored to lose 1, if not both of them. There's even a poll came out. It had Beasley ahead, and the Supreme Court nominees down by 6 or 7 points on the Democratic side. That's really bad. So it's pretty much a given. It's pretty much expected that Democrats will lose the North Carolina Supreme Court. Today is one of the last days of court hearings. The Leandro case is going to be coming up as well, which is equally iffy constitutionally. But they had a big ruling today in NAACP versus Moore. The NAACP challenged 2 constitutional amendments that were passed in 2018. They said these amendments should be struck down because the legislature was gerrymandered, and a gerrymandered legislature cannot pass constitutional amendments. And the North Carolina Supreme Court agreed with them and also said maybe, and also threw it down to a lower court. So I'm going to sum it up real quick, and then I'm going to throw it to Kraz to kind of get into more detail on why this is really not great, because I think we're both in agreement this is pretty concerning in terms of what the implications of this could be. So Republicans, they had to redraw the maps in 2018 because a court ruled that it was gerrymandered. The legislature was gerrymandered. This resulted in them losing, among other things, their majority, not majority, their supermajority in the legislature. It was ruled they need to do it. They redrew it after 2018. They redrew it in 2020. They lost those seats in 2018 already. So that was then preemptively ruled in 2020 that these seats were bad and needed to be redrawn. So the NAACP's argument here is that because the legislature was gerrymandered, they did not have the will of the people and thus did not have the necessary support to pass a constitutional amendment. This is nowhere stated in the North Carolina Constitution. It's not even implied at. But the Democratic majority, realizing their time is limited here probably, has agreed. So basically what they said was, one, these 2 constitutional amendments was that, yes, a gerrymandered legislature cannot pass constitutional amendments. You need 2/3. You need a supermajority to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot, and then you need voters to approve that. Voters approved both of these amendments. The voter ID amendment, which is just hey, wouldn't it be a great idea if we passed a voter ID? The legislature should do this. It's non-binding. Should here means they would be a good idea if they did this. Not the legislature must do this. It's not a binding deal at all. The income tax one caps the maximum income tax in the state at 7%. Voter ID passed with 11% of the vote. The income tax one passed with 17% majority. It won a majority in Wake County, Mecklenburg County, Forsyth County. This is not a controversial amendment. But education advocates, among others, want to increase taxes at some point. And so they argued that these both need to go away. The court, so first and foremost, the court said, yes, the legislature cannot pass constitutional amendments if they're gerrymandered. They also said that this doesn't really matter unless the gerrymandering would impact whether the amendment passed in the legislature. So basically, the other 2 amendments that passed, hunting and fishing and Marcy's Law, neither of which are very controversial at all. Those passed overwhelmingly as well. Those passed with near unanimous support in the legislature to get on the ballot. So those aren't impacted at all. But the court's basically saying is that those would have passed anyway, regardless of gerrymandering. So basically what they're pointing to is that if these districts were not gerrymandered, the 2 income tax and voter ID would not have passed. This is true. On top of this, they're also saying that if this happens and the ones could have a racist impact, then the lower court can look at them and say, yes, this should not have been passed. This is discriminating against the group. The group is harmed by the gerrymandering. And so the gerrymandering is out of the way. These have to go away because gerrymandering resulted in racist law. Their argument for voter ID is pretty obvious, that voter ID is racist. You can disagree or agree with that, but that's the general assumption, is that the voter ID law would be racist. The income tax one, even the Supreme Court admits this is iffy. They basically said that it's racist to cap the income tax at 7%. Because higher taxes favor poorer communities, that if you tax the rich more, this favors poorer communities, which are predominantly communities of color. And thus, if you cap the income tax, you're basically mandating a tax cut to the wealthy, which has an impact on the poor, which means it's racist. That's pretty iffy, and that's the one that the court could look down at. So this is going to a lower court in Wake County, which is then going to decide whether to strike these amendments down. Temporarily, because these will absolutely be overturned in 2023. But so they're almost certainly going to strike down the voter ID, and there is a good chance they strike down the income tax cap, which will have no practical impact whatsoever because the legislature is not going to raise the income tax. So, Kraz, why is this potentially a problem?
So it's just a weird legal theory that I'm surprised the court bought because, so I think my understanding is this. I haven't read the full decision. My understanding is this. The court was trying to limit itself by saying it was only looking at things that were passed between the time that the legislature was found by the court to be an unconstitutional gerrymander and the time when the districts were redrawn and the members were reelected. The reason for this is that going back in time and looking at every single legislature and trying to invalidate laws is both silly and also kind of like an ex post facto thing. Like there's no fair warning, there's no due process there. The theory here, I think, is that, you know, the legislature already knew it had been ruled an unconstitutional gerrymander. So the fact that it passed it had fair warning that it was unconstitutionally elected. I don't really buy that argument for a few reasons. The first is, I think Eric pointed this out to me when before we went live, but he pointed out that there were other things passed in that time period, including veto overrides, that also likely wouldn't have passed with a fair map. And the court didn't really seem to look at those either. Also, the limiting it to things that have a racially disparate impact doesn't really make any sense. Like, it makes sense on a surface level because the legislature was an unconstitutional gerrymander because it used race to gerrymander, but it doesn't follow that then the legislature is only barred from doing things that have a racially disparate impact, right? Like if the legislature is illegally elected, it's illegally elected, right? It doesn't get to do things that don't relate to the reason why it was unconstitutional. It doesn't make any sense. There's no connection there. And so
I don't think it would be as strange a decision if the court invalidated all laws passed during that time frame.
So the problem is there are things that Democrats would not like to be repealed over it, like teacher pay raises, budgets, bond initiatives, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so this is the thing, is that I actually kind of agree with Dylan in that, like, I think if they had said, look, everything passed in this time period is null and void, that would be kind of absurd and a little bit silly. But at least it would be logically consistent, right?
Right.
Like, at least it would be like in Mississippi, I think it was maybe a year or two ago, the state Supreme Court ruled that because the state constitution requires requires ballot measures to get signatures from all 5 state congressional districts, and the state has only had 4 for 20 years, that every single ballot measure in the last 20 years in Mississippi is invalid.
What?
Yes. Yeah. So it was a little bit, I think that was an example of a decision that maybe was a little bit silly, but at least they were consistent there, right? Like at least they kind of stuck with it all the way through. In this North Carolina case, they're really not sticking with it all the way through. They're kind of half-assing it, and they're kind of like trying to come up with a limiting principle, but there really is no limiting principle. The other problem with this is that it assumes, like, it goes through and it counts the seats. This is another problem because it assumes that if the map was drawn fairly, that every single one of those yes votes would have been replaced with a no vote, which is not necessarily true, right? Like,
that's ridiculous.
Yeah, you can't really assume that. And so I think it operates with a level of kind of surgical certainty that makes no sense, and actually isn't really certain and isn't really precise at all. Actually, this is a very silly legal theory, and I'm actually surprised. I'm actually shocked it gained any traction. I've never heard this argument before, and this is silly. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad argument to make on a messaging level, but
right
as a judicial theory. Little strange.
Yeah. And the weird thing is this is basically over nothing because Democrats aren't going to win the legislature anytime soon. They pretty much established they can't win a fair map in a neutral year. They're probably going to, there's a good chance they lose a supermajority in a fair map that was drawn by the court this year. There's a reasonable chance that happens. The voter ID is literally meaningless. It's just a statement of like, we should have a voter ID. Wouldn't that be cool? Don't you agree with that, voters? We should do this. And then they get the legislature can look, the voters want this voter ID law. It's not racist. We're going to pass it. That was literally the theory here. And then the court struck down the voter ID law anyway.
Yeah, see,
the income tax, Democrats aren't going to raise the income tax rate above 7% because they're not going to have the legislature.
I don't like non-binding ballot initiatives. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, why am I going to have a ballot initiative so voters can say, yes, do this, when the legislature is under no obligation to then do it?
The right to hunt and fish amendment. It literally just adds something to the Constitution that's saying people have a right to hunt and fish. Is this a practical change in anything? No. Is it something most people agree with? Sure. Did 40% of voters vote against it anyway because Republicans supported it? Yes.
I think it's a silly thing to add to the Constitution, but if you want to, whatever.
Yeah, so number one, this is not going to, if this holds, it's not going to be in a way Democrats want, because this could be, if Paul Louie really wants to apply this legal theory, he could apply some interesting ideas to this thing. Like, for example, The legislature was gerrymandered in the 1990s when the governor of North Carolina was given a veto power, and it was egregiously racially gerrymandered according to court rulings back then. So I'm sorry, Governor Roy Cooper, you don't have a veto anymore. Like you could, like,
Yeah,
if
you
it holds,
would have
you
to
open
take
this sort of nonsense. Like,
yeah, but you would have to take the limiting fact. You would have to take
You
the limiting factor off of it and
you
take
would.
the decision from kind
Well,
of
but
weird to completely ridiculous.
Well, okay, but I actually think, I mean, you probably do, because I think you have like fair notice and due process problems if you start saying that like you can go backwards in time like that. But in theory, not really, right? If you really buy, and I think these like judges do kind of buy it at some level, like that it's not like the legislature became racially gerrymandered just when they ruled it was. You know, in theory, the legislature was always racially gerrymandered, and the court was just stating facts and coming to the correct conclusion when it looked at the facts in the law. So under that theory, right? Under that theory, you know, then the legislature was always racially gerrymandered. And it was always illegitimate. And so there's no like, you know what I mean? Like,
but you would still have
the more accurate.
You would
Yeah,
still
go ahead.
have the I think you would still have the due process problem of, in this case, the court specifically ruled that, and then they did these things. The court
the
in
more
the
accurate
90s didn't say it was racially gerrymandered, and then
there
never
were some
did
legislative
anything.
there were maps that were struck down in the 90s because of gerrymandering, and there were maps in the 2000s that were struck down because of racial gerrymandering. What I think the most likely scenario, though, is that the Republicans have a 5-2 majority Supreme Court in 2023. The legislature sues for something, and then the Supreme Court's like repudiates itself immediately. Like, this was wrong. We repudiate this ruling. This is never happening again at minimum. And I don't know if they could actually retroactively go back and say, actually, this law is no longer unconstitutional. That seems a bit odd. But Republicans could easily, have a supermajority or have enough to put them on the ballot, put these up again, and they would pass again by wide margins because North Carolinians don't like taxes. And North Carolinians, like voter ID generally. So, like, it would just be back where you started. The more crazy one, which I don't want to take too much time up with this because it's not happening yet, and we still got other stuff to go over, is the Leandro case, where 2 consecutive state controllers have basically told, it's basically a judge, it's been long ruled that North Carolina is in violation of a provision in the Constitution saying that you need basic right to education. They basically just been telling the legislature for years, pay more for education. The legislature's been like, no, or not as much as you want. So the plaintiffs and the defendants in this case, which the plaintiff is Roy Cooper and the executive and the defendants are the school systems, have come to an agreement on this like $750 million package over multiple years. So $750 million the first year, which would fund education more. And a judge has basically said, to the Treasury, withdraw this money from the Treasury and spend it on this, which is not legal in North Carolina. You can't, the legislatures are the one who can appropriate and spend money. 2 consecutive controllers here, the last one appointed by Roy Cooper, have said, if you do this, we could literally be arrested and subject to liability, both civil and criminal liability for doing this, because this is illegal. So the Supreme Court may also order this in coming weeks, which would be, again, borderline constitutional crisis. I think if they do that, the legislature would seriously consider impeachment, which they would be able to do, but it would remove these judges from the bench until the legislature decides to hold a trial. Which, again, full-blown constitutional crisis in North Carolina. Keep an eye out for this, because I think that one is actually going to be the more problematic one, because the legislature is not happy about this one. They weren't happy with the maps. When you take away the legislature's power to spend money, that is when they get really, really angry. Really, really angry. Just nothing good will come out of this. But so, yeah, keep an eye on the Leandro case, because that one is coming up very soon. The court will rule on this, and you may see some actual like constitutional crisis shenanigans in North Carolina. Real quick, though, before we close, let's talk about this week's primaries. New York primaries, Florida primaries.
No.
Florida's mostly boring. New York,
Well,
though,
no, there is
New York's
one.
got some fun ones.
Sorry, there is one.
Oh, the
Florida
Laura Loomer
primary
one?
that is-
Yeah, the Webster
No,
Loomer
well,
one.
No, the it might be the Webster Loomer one.
I don't know that one.
So there's the Webster Loomer one, and then there's the one in the open district that Val Deming is vacating, as I'm pretty sure what Dylan was trying to get at.
Yes. Sorry,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
echo kept trying to talk to me. No, the Grayson, Alan Grayson re-entry into Florida politics again.
Alan
Um,
Grayson, what a blast from
Oh,
the
boy.
past.
We got to
Alan-
get the Alan Grace and Alan West matchup again. We got to bring back the good old names.
Oh, Alan West. Remember when he thought he could be the governor of Texas?
Yeah.
No, so Alan Grayson is trying to re-enter politics against a against a leading candidate who has literally been endorsed by everybody. It literally has been endorsed by every progressive group, the Orlando Sentinel, the crypto PACs. Everybody's behind this guy. And then Alan Grayson's like, hi, I want to come back.
And he's just running flyers from like Obama and Pelosi from 10 years ago saying
Well-
Alan Grayson is great.
And not
Like-
even that, he, okay, there are texts floating around accusing the leading candidate, Alejandro Frost, of sexual assault. Like,
Ooh.
anonymous allegations being texted to voters.
Oh, that's absolutely something Alan Grayson would do. Yep.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's Alan Grayson, but it started happening immediately after Alan Grayson entered the race. So
Yep, that's Alan Grayson right there. Oh boy.
Didn't he get in trouble because he what did he really get in trouble for?
domestic violence, I think.
Oh,
Being
well,
a
that was one of them.
freaking idiot for one. Like
I was gonna say there was,
he's basically the Democratic version of Matt Gaetz. I mean, essentially, like
there was something about like he got on the floor of the House and used images from like Auschwitz to compare to the House's refusal to pass like universal health care or something.
Don't compare anything to the Holocaust.
So that I
Just
remember
have
that
fun.
one. I don't remember what else though, but I think he did get in trouble for a lot of different stuff.
yeah, he basically was when I say he's the Matt Gaetz, I don't mean in like the grooming stuff. I mean like just in terms of the general lunacy and outrageousness. Like that's what he was. He was basically the Matt Gaetz of Florida of the Democratic Party before that.
I'm looking up Alan Grayson just because I'm assuming there's a laundry list.
Yeah, it was. I mean, again, it was the Grayson West one. May generally have been like the most delusional, one of the most delusional races of all time. Like it was just generally
domestic abuse.
Yeah, he sent a fundraising email comparing the Tea Party to the Ku Klux Klan. He had some tendencies to go on some weird right-wing programs. Like apparently he went on the Alex Jones show criticizing the Fed Reserve's chairman.
What?
Yeah, like
Okay.
he basically
Okay.
Weird. Yeah, he's basically like the dirtbag left guy of Florida. It's there's too much to go into, but New York though. They'll be interesting to watch. The Loomer Webster one I'm keeping an eye on quietly because Loomer is outraising Webster, but I'm not sure if that's actually an indication that Webster's in trouble or if it's just Loomer being a lunatic and just getting the lunatic, in donations as usual.
That's definitely
But
the
New
grift
York
vote, right? Like
the grift vote. Yeah, the seat as the Villages. She is crazy enough that she could maybe potentially put that seat into play. Like she's banned from every social media platform. She's banned from I think Uber Eats. She's banned from
How do you get banned from? Hold on, I think we need to talk about this. How do you get banned from Uber Eats?
I'm pretty sure her delivery person she assumed was a Muslim and then insulted him. So she was banned from Uber.
Like,
so she's been
getting banned from Uber. Like you drink a little bit too much and throw up in the back of the car. But getting banned from Uber Eats is gonna be tough.
Yeah, she got banned from both Uber and Lyft after she tweeted that she was not able to find a non-Muslim cab driver.
Oh my God, just sit in the. Okay, you can still be hateful and sit in the car with a Muslim. Oh my God.
Yeah. Again, she's like just a legitimate nutcase.
Yeah. Well,
and
isn't she the one who pulled that I'm handcuffing myself to Facebook?
Yeah, to Twitter.
Yeah.
She went on stage, I think, like this play, the Shakespeare in the Park play, and started yelling something. Like she's a lunatic. Yeah, she's banned from Uber Eats. She's banned from PayPal, from Twitter.
Man, you have to be really hateful for Uber to not take your money.
Yeah, but before we close off, because I know Krause is going to go here in a few minutes. New York,
Yep.
New York 12. What are your thoughts? New York 12 and New York 10. It looks like in New York 12 that Jerry Nadler has a lead here over Carolyn Maloney, noted anti-vaxxer and N-word enthusiast, Carolyn Maloney.
Yeah. I never thought I'd be rooting for Jerry Nadler.
And here you are.
This sucks. He's the lesser of three evils.
Yeah, so Nadler looks like he's in pretty good shape. He got the Chuck Schumer endorsement.
He got Chuck Schumer. He got the New York Times. I mean, I don't see a world where Nadler loses. If we're going for maximum chaos, though, I hope that world where he loses is one where he loses to Suraj Patel, because that would just be utter madness.
And then
I'm
New
trying to
York
think.
10, yeah.
Well, yeah, and then yeah, I was gonna say New York 10, but yeah, go on.
New York.
It looks
10,
like Dan Goldman has the advantage here. It looks like, I'm pretty sure, but we don't really know.
I would say tilt Goldman. But the New York 10 other candidates seem to be employing a very strange strategy of anyone but Goldman, but none of us are going to drop out.
Yeah, like Mondaire Jones and Julie New both held rallies together.
Carolina Rivera and Elizabeth Holtzman did too.
Yeah, Trump basically, if you missed it over the week, yesterday, Donald Trump actually endorsed Dan Goldman very sarcastically. I mean, this is very clearly a joke endorsement. But immediately, Julie New and I think Mondaire Jones both jumped on this as like, well, look, Trump has endorsed Dan Goldman. You don't want to vote for the Trump endorsed candidate, do you? He also endorsed Carolyn Maloney, for that matter.
Which, okay, Carolyn Maloney now has Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump endorsing her.
I gotta say, if Trump's endorsement wins in a Democratic primary, we gotta count it for like double, right? Like that's gotta be like
yeah, that's really padding his win record.
The Maloney one kind of makes sense. The Maloney one kind of makes sense, right? Because I'm assuming his district, if that district, the portion it was representing, the Silk Stocking area of New York, that's probably where Trump lived, and I'm pretty sure he had a fairly amenable relationship with New York City Democrats for quite a while, including Maloney. So I don't think that one's as sarcastic as the other one. Well, the Dan Goldman one clearly is a joke endorsement.
You were taking that in a different direction. I thought we were both going to say they're vaguely racist Islamophobes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like, again, like they fit the similar profile of like, I mean, yeah, that's actually pretty similar.
Vaguely,
you're right. I mean,
that too.
Like if he's going to pick the two, if he's going to pick, if you're a Republican in the district, you're pretty clearly going to pick Carolyn Maloney. She's still liberal, but she also voted for some other things and is on cultural issues is less liberal, I guess, than Nadler, kind of sometimes. I don't know.
I feel like she's not exactly more conservative. She just she's a weird, like, she panders to the right without actually voting with them.
No. Wait, sorry. What you guys are looking for, okay, the description is that she's Silk Stockings, New York, like vaguely anti-vaxxer, vaguely just like unhappy, like vague, like just like she's like a cranky New Yorker. Like that's like her like whole thing.
Right.
Yeah, New Yorkers are just cranky.
Before we go, because I have to sign off in a minute, but I do want to say I still think this entire primary saga is funny because it's what happens when people from New York aren't treated like the center of the universe. After these maps were passed, I want to just recall how absolutely batshit a bunch of the New York Democrats went on Twitter. Hakeem Jeffries was basically calling for the independent state legislatures doctrine, saying that the special master was overriding the democratic will of the people of New York. So that was very funny. I also think it was very funny that the Upper East and Upper West Side had to be in the same district. They swore up and down they were very different places.
It's going to be really funny when the upper and or when the East and West Side both vote for the same candidate.
Yeah, I also think it was very funny. Like I mean, I think you're forgetting, Dylan. One side is rich white people on the west side of Central Park, and the other side is rich white people on the east side of Central Park.
They're both going to
But
be the only places who vote for Dan Goldman. So
Yes,
No,
but
what you're
also,
forgetting here, is that both the rich and the ones in the west are somewhat more Jewish, and the ones in
Yeah.
the east are somewhat, or the ones on the east are somewhat more Protestant, and the ones on the west are somewhat more Jewish. These are very, very major differences in cultures, totally irreconcilable.
I would also like to say that I think this was a VRA violation, because if there's one group that does not get adequate representation in Congress, it is rich white people from major metropolitan areas. So I think this was pretty fucked up by the special master.
oh, this map is getting struck down. This map is totally getting redrawn, and we're going to have another cursed New York 10 primary in like 2 years. Like, is there even any doubt?
I mean, it depends on what the court says about the independent state legislatures. I don't think the New York Supreme Court's going to go up against itself so quickly.
The New York
because like they
the
still
North
lost two.
Carolina
Like,
Supreme Court's about to.
that's going from a 4-3 to a 5-2. New York was a 2-person majority, and only one of them is against it. The other one, like people said, it was a one vote decision, but the one vote was it wanted to kick it back to the legislature to redraw. I don't think that one vote, now that the Chief Justice is gone, is now going to go ahead and say, yeah, the legislature still gets to do this again and again and again. Like it doesn't seem like on merits that's what they would side with, but it really depends. But we should let Kraz get going here. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on this. Tune in Tuesday. We'll be hosting live election coverage. Joe may not be able to be there again. He's got some stuff he's dealing with right now. So it may just be the rest of the crew, but we will be there on Tuesday covering these two very important primaries.
Oh, it's going to be
some of the last of the big states
night
so far.
Yep.
Yeah. Very weird night.
All right. Well,
later,
See everyone.
Kraz.
Yep. But be sure to like and subscribe to our podcast, whatever you're watching it from. Like us on Anchor, Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. All your favorite podcast providers are probably there. YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, any of them. It really does help us out. We're over 530 subscribers on YouTube now, which is really cool. We love the support you guys are giving. Keep the ball going. We're hoping to gain more in November. But yeah, again, thank you guys for watching. We'll be here next week, and we'll be here on Tuesday. Be sure to tune on Tuesday for that primary coverage.